Thank you, Tom.
Muted.
This is Ben speaking here, and I'm excited to be with everyone today to take you through some key considerations associated with getting started with ECOA or ePRO. And let's actually start by taking a quick poll of the audience. And there are two questions we're going to ask you. I believe they will be asked one at a time. The first one is, do you currently collect PROs, patient-reported outcomes, whether paper or electronically? So if you collect them via paper or electronically, answer yes. The second question in the poll that you'll see is, when are you planning on implementing ECOA and ePRO? So these questions will be asked one at a time. We'll give about 30 seconds for folks to put in their responses, and then we'll look at them together. Okay, so it looks like the results of the first question were about 74% of respondents currently collect PROs, either on paper or electronically. So go ahead and put your answer into the second question. Okay, and so you can see by the chart here how early on in the planning process some folks may be. Thank you for doing that. So today we're going to take you through the following agenda items. First, I'm going to review some common terminology that you'll most likely run into in your journey through ECOA. I'm going to talk about some of the benefits and motivations for doing this. Then we're going to look at some of the existing barriers and really the reality of what it actually takes to do this today. And in the process, we're going to go through some key considerations in the area of the possible technologies that are available to you, some of the key regulatory guidances that are published, and also talk about what it takes to get your forms or instruments in a fashion that's appropriate for use in an ECOA setting. Now, as Tom mentioned, we here at OpenClinica do have an ECOA product, but today we're actually not going to be talking about that. If you're interested in learning about the ECOA product that OpenClinica has, which is called OpenClinica Participate, we have a separate webinar scheduled just for that. It's on July 21st. And you can go to our website at openclinica.com to read about it and sign up if you're interested. So unfortunately, for better or for worse, we're in an industry that is replete with acronyms. And so what I'm about to do is run through some of those acronyms, but it's important that we have an understanding for what they mean and how they're used. So first of all, ECOA stands for Electronic Clinical Outcomes Assessment. It's basically an electronic assessment that's influenced by some sort of human choice, judgment, or motivation, and they're often used to support either direct or indirect evidence of a treatment benefit. It's true electronic source data, and instead of trying to memorize that dictionary definition, you can think of it as really patient-driven e-data. And the terms patient, participant, and subject are really all synonymous, especially for the purposes of this presentation, so I will use them interchangeably. And the terms assessment, instrument, questionnaire, and form are also essentially synonyms. So when you look at conducting ECOA, there are several different modalities that ECOA is organized into. We have ePRO, Clinro, OBSRO, and then PERFO. So ePRO, the one at the top, is electronic patient-reported outcomes, and there the actor is the patient, him or herself. And you would use ePRO when a trained health professional is not needed, whenever a self-report is feasible. You know, examples would include how a patient or participant is feeling, pain levels, mood, eating habits, and so forth. Clinro, by comparison, is a modality in which a clinician is actually providing the data on behalf of the patient. So you might be doing this in a situation where a trained health professional is actually needed in order to capture the data that's required. Examples might include taking a measurement of a tumor, or maybe palpating a spleen. OBSRO, in an OBSRO setting, which is observer-reported outcomes, the person recording the data is going to be somebody other than the patient and other than a health professional. So you can think of perhaps a parent providing data on behalf of their infant child. You could think of a caregiver providing data on behalf of an elderly person. PERFO is an acronym you probably won't hear too much, but basically it refers to just a specific task that is required by the protocol. So something like a walk test, a 6-minute walk test that the patient's required to complete, or some sort of memory recall, that would be considered a performance outcome. And a lot of people are fairly sloppy in how they use these acronyms, and that's fine with me. I'm not a stickler for them. ePRO is often used to refer generically to any of these particular modalities. So throughout this presentation, we'll be referring to eCOA and ePRO interchangeably, unless we're specifically referring to a clinician actor or an observer actor, and then we'll point that out and use the term Clinro or OBSRO. So why do people do this? Why collect data electronically from patients? There are really 3 primary categories of motivations: quality, to obtain higher quality data; productivity, to enhance and deliver more productive studies; and then the third one is enablement, because it can allow you to do more interesting and more useful things than you could do on paper. So if we look at quality, eCOA or ePRO can deliver higher quality data. In an electronic setting, you can incorporate edit checks into your form. You can enforce that a date is actually put into a date field. You can show only the fields and ask only the questions that are relevant to patients. So you can show males questions that only apply to males, females that apply only to females, and in so doing simplify the user experience. From a productivity standpoint, eCOA can deliver data in a more timely fashion and reduce the amount of labor associated with cleaning the data and, of course, entering the data. Since it's e-source, by definition, there is a reduced or eliminated need for data entry. Automation can be applied in terms of notifications. You can automatically notify patients when things need to take place. You can electronically monitor the study more easily. And you can get data earlier to prevent problems and make faster decisions. And finally, from an enablement perspective, eCOA can allow you to engage your patient population in new ways. It's something that can integrate into a patient's existing lifestyle, especially if they're able to use their own devices. It's also something that can allow you perhaps to reach a much larger patient population. And finally, it can cut down on the amount of administration that may have to take place during a patient's visit to allow the clinician to focus more on the patient's care. So let's take a quick look at comparing paper versus electronic pro modalities. So in the paper world, paper is what a lot of people are used to, so at a certain level, it's the devil they know. When you have paper, you don't need to worry about the internet, but piles of paper can be confusing, and some of the diaries and some of the questionnaires that are sent to patients are quite voluminous. Paper, of course, has a greater likelihood of getting lost or destroyed. It also provides slow access to actionable information. And we've all heard about the parking lot syndrome, in which the subject is sitting in the parking lot of the clinic where they're about to go in for their monthly follow-up visit, and they're completing the prior month's worth of diary entries in that one sitting. You're not going to get good quality data in that scenario. If we look at applying an electronic model to doing this, we can control the experience more. We can prompt users automatically. We can remind patients when they need things. We can monitor when things happen, and we can, in so doing, we can work to increase compliance, both from a patient protocol compliance standpoint as well as from a regulatory compliance standpoint. And there have been numerous studies that show that ePRO often produces compliance rates well over 90%. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the regulatory compliance friendly features that can be part and parcel with eCOA. In short, some of those things include the ability to have secure logins and passwords, date and time stamps in an audit trail, and as well as benefiting from eSource. So here's a slide that provides just a real simple framework for thinking about ROI. So if you're embarking on eCOA and you want to try to measure what you're going to get out of it versus what you have to put into it, here are some elements that might help you quantify that. So if you're doing paper, you're incurring certain costs. These costs include printing and mailing of the paper. They include paying somebody to enter the data and clean the data. You might be able to measure those costs directly for yourselves. There have been some attempts to do this. Most of the numbers out there for cost estimates come from eCOA system vendors, so I wouldn't necessarily take them at face value, but some of the research that I've seen suggests that these costs can be as high as $20 per page. In an electronic world, you're incurring the cost of a system. Whether you build the system, whether you buy the system, there's going to be, in most cases, a fairly significant upfront cost. But what we see is that the downstream cost is typically far lower. And costs that you're saving as the study's operating include data entry costs or lack of data entry costs, less costs associated with data cleaning. You can avoid the costs associated with printing and mailing paper, and possibly you can sidestep site payments that you might have to otherwise make. There are also some less tangible, harder to quantify quality benefits that come from increased accuracy of data, allowing patients to have more time, increasing compliance. Those are things that can be very high impact, but can be a little bit harder to quantify, perhaps. And of course, the overall greater productivity that you can typically obtain from doing this electronically can lead to faster study closeout, which could have its own benefits as well. So there are some key technology trends that are also helping to support the motivation and provide benefits for doing eCOA. This includes the ongoing increased ubiquity of internet access, increased ubiquity of mobile devices, and what those devices are capable of doing. Responsive design, especially as it applies to web technology. Responsive design is basically a technique that allows a web interface to physically adapt to appropriately fit the size of the screen that's accessing it. You can see a simple example here in the graphic of the same page being rendered on both a laptop, a tablet, and a smartphone. So responsive design is really a key element in enabling a more diverse set of devices to be used in an ePRO setting. Sensories and wearables, there's a huge industry of new sensory and wearable devices. I think there's probably well over 90,000 of them on the market right now. In fact, there's a website, wearables.com, that does a pretty good job of categorizing these things. Everything, and these include everything from devices that measure glucose, spirometers, heart rate monitors, activity meters, things that measure blood oxygen levels. I actually saw a Kickstarter campaign for something called the world's first smart cup, and this was a cup that you could pour a drink into and it would somehow recognize what the drink was. So you pour a beer into the cup and the LED screen would say beer, and presumably it would be able to deduce how many calories might be in that drink. I don't think we'd be likely seeing smart cups used in clinical research anytime soon, but it gives you an example of the types of, really the broad types of devices that are out there today. And then there are more, some new phenomenons that have entered into the fray, including the Apple Research Kit and some really good work being done on the e-consent front too that are really helping to reduce the barriers to participating and making enrollment in electronic clinical trials a lot more efficient. So eCOA can be a great way to better engage with patients. It's something that, as I pointed out, can integrate into subjects' lives, especially if they can use their own devices. It can allow you to capture more data, and oftentimes, a certain number of events or tracking a certain number of occurrences are necessary in order to demonstrate efficacy or safety in a trial. And it can also be used to provide feedback for participants. So you can provide motivational content. You can provide the participant with a clear timeline that shows them exactly where they are in the process, what they just, may congratulate them for the milestone they just completed, and provide them with a clear depiction of what's expected next. In some cases, and you have to be careful about these last two things here, but showing patients how they are improving over time, providing some instant feedback about how they're improving over time is something that's possible with eCOA, showing them how they compare versus the broader population. And of course, you'd want to be very sensitive to doing these in situations where patients aren't improving or they're not faring well relative to the overall population. You certainly want to keep that in mind. Bottom line is that there's a very strong feedback loop between patient compliance and patient engagement. The more engaged patients are, the more compliant they are. The more compliant they are, the more engaged they are. So you really want to think about an engagement strategy when you embark on eCOA. So to bring another acronym into the mix here, and this is an acronym that we're probably all familiar with, ALCOA is an acronym used to really describe a set of key principles by which regulators judge data quality around the world. ALCOA stands for attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. So let's briefly see how each of these stacks up in an eCOA setting. So attributable refers to who performed the action or changed the record and why. In an eCOA world, any user would have some sort of login or access code. You'd have audit logs, and you're able to track these things much better than in a paper world. Legible refers to how the data are recorded and whether that is secure and readable. In an electronic world, the data is digital. By definition, it's structured. You're going to get better structure in an electronic world. Contemporaneous refers to having timestamps that show when the data was collected. Of course, you can get that in an electronic system through audit logs, and more generally, you can better track and control when things happen in an electronic world. Original. So is the information certified as an original copy? So eCOA is eSource. So you have a very direct trace to the original source of data. And then accurate. Are there errors relating to data entry or editing? In an eCOA world, an electronic world, you can use things like edit checks and rules logic to ensure the accuracy of data. So eCOA plays very, very nice in this pre-existing world governed by the principles of ALCOA. So we've gone through some of the motivations, some of the reasons why people do eCOA. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the actual realities of that are. And I'm going to focus first by highlighting on some barriers that may exist. And these include the expense or the perceived expense of adopting an electronic way of collecting patient-reported outcomes. It can include devices, perhaps the need to provision devices to patients and all of the logistical complexity surrounding that. Barriers can include the usability of a particular solution or instrument in an electronic form. It may include the fit or lack of fit with study population. If the study doesn't have access to technology or isn't able to use it somehow, that can be a barrier. Integration with EDC systems can be a barrier. You know, if you're collecting data electronically, how is that data going to get into the ultimate repository for the clinical trial? As well as translating existing PROs into electronic form. So, you know, it's not necessarily feasible to take an existing paper form and render that electronically and assume you're going to get scientifically valid results. So these are some of the barriers to adopting eCOA, and what we'd like to do now is take another quick poll to see which of these may have prevented you from doing this in the past. So our poll question, and you'll see the poll pop up here on your screen, is what has prevented you from adopting eCOA or ePRO? So we'll take a few seconds to let people respond to the poll, and we'll see what the results are. Okay, so we have some results here, and about a third of respondents cited expense as a reason for why they have been prevented from being able to adopt eCOA. 20% cited logistical complexity, 23% cited a lack of fit with study population, 12% cited EDC integration, and 12% cited lack of appropriate instruments or questionnaires. So thank you for that. So we're going to peel back the onion a little bit and look at what it actually might take for you to be able to do eCOA. And I'm going to give you a simple formula to keep in mind, and I'm going to say that success in eCOA is a function of both planning and implementation. And as we look at this formula, we're going to break it down by examining how to plan and implement a successful patient experience, how to plan and implement your content, your instruments, how to make sure you are doing things in a way that is aligned with the applicable regulations, and then also look at the universe of possible technology choices you have so that you can plan and implement appropriately for that as well. So first we'll look at the patient experience. How will you engage your patients? How will you motivate them? Motivation, really is an engine that's inside of a person. It's something that people are so committed to, whether or not they are paid for it. It causes them to want to keep sacrificing and serving for the cause. Incentive is a little bit different. Incentive is what will it take to keep your patients coming back, and then finally, what kind of feedback might you provide patients in order to keep them engaged? And we've touched a little bit about some specific examples in all of these areas so far, but you really want to think about things by having the patient experience drive what you plan. And part and parcel with the patient experience is usability. And here I want to stress the importance of keeping the system very, very simple from the patient's perspective. And from our experience, simple can be harder than complex. It can take a lot more work to create a solution that's simple. But if you can do it and you can do it well, you can be a lot more effective. So when you think about usability, think of the number of forms or instruments you're asking the patient to complete. Think about the overall burden that this is likely to place on the subject. Think about the number of items per page that you may be showing to the patient, even if the form has to be long, rather than displaying 20 items on one page. It's almost always better to break it out into smaller pieces, maybe with one or perhaps one or two items per page. Scrolling, you always want to be cognizant of a situation the patient may find themselves in which they'd have to scroll in order to see the questions. If they have to scroll to see something, they may not see it unless they scroll. Edit checks. So if there are any data managers listening, I would encourage you to be very judicious with your use of edit checks. From a usability standpoint, every edit check that's added to a study needs to be viewed as a barrier to getting data. So if there is an edit check that you're adding, beyond something that's like just a data type check, there should be a really good deliberate reason for doing it. Otherwise, you could be inadvertently creating a barrier to getting the data. And in a similar vein, required fields are something that really should be dealt with carefully as well. If you're requiring a field, you're requiring a patient to provide a response when maybe a response is not applicable, or maybe they don't want to answer the question. Maybe they don't want to provide a response, and you're forcing them to do it, so they provide an incorrect response, therefore providing you with questionable data quality. So we also encourage our clients to be very careful with how they use required fields. Skip logic can be a great way to tailor the forms, tailor the questions to the particular users to ensure that they only receive questions that are likely to be relevant to them. You want to think about your patient population and whether your participants are likely to have any disabilities. Everything, from colorblind people who may not be able to distinguish between, say, red and orange, to perhaps elderly that may need, larger font sizes or greater color contrast. Offline, so what happens if the devices are offline, whether it's a patient's device or a provision device? How are you? What are you going to do? Are you going to provide paper as a backup? And how are you going to make that a usable thing for the study participants? And then finally, what's your support infrastructure going to look like? What sort of support mechanisms are you going to have in place for patients? What types of questions can you anticipate? What types of advanced resources might you be able to put together to provide that support to patients? And how are you going to support devices? If patients are using their own device, or if you're provisioning a device to patients, and what will the logistics look like around that support? From a language standpoint, when you're designing your instruments to be used electronically, try to avoid terms like press, click, and mouse, things that sort of presume the user is sitting in front of a PC with a mouse. Instead of those types of terms, you might think of using terms like select, choose, or enter. And these three terms would really apply across different types of devices and would apply to touch screens as well as more traditional PCs. Will your instruments need to be translated? If so, make sure you avoid any type of idiomatic expressions. Be aware of the languages they might be used in to make sure that you've allowed for enough text length. Different languages can be, the same question rendered in different languages can be very different in length, and you want to make sure that your overall UI can accommodate the lowest common denominator. Also, some languages are read from left to right. Other languages are read from right to left, so you'd want to bear that in mind as well. And of course, you may want to consider full linguistic validation of the instruments themselves, which should uncover any of these types of issues as well as other issues that you may not have expected. So it's almost always a good idea to make all the questions self-contained. So you want to basically, as a best practice, avoid using item stems. So an example of a question that uses an item stem is this. It says, during the last week, how has your pain interfered with going to work, sleeping at night? And you may have, 10 or 20 bullets, options that are presented in this way. And especially in an electronic setting, if the patient gets option number 12 on a new screen of the system, they may have forgotten what the actual item stem was. So it's generally always a good idea to repeat the stem with each question. So this same question with the stem could be reworded in the following way here. During the last week, how has your pain interfered with going to work? And then during the last week, how has your pain interfered with sleeping at night? So what if you have instruments that have only been used on paper to date and you want to use them in an ECOA setting? Well, the FDA would tell you that you need to show that the ECOA version of the instrument yields the same data, or yields data which are equivalent and at least as good, if not better, to the data that you're able to collect from paper. You also have to show that the ECOA version of the instrument measures the same thing that the paper does. And you need to have evidence that proves this. And the level of evidence that you need really depends on the severity of the change that you're making. And the FDA has some guidance documents that go through this in excruciating detail. But the International Society for Pharmacoeconomics and Outcomes Research, ISPOR, has done a really nice job of digesting this into the following chart. And again, there's a link here that will take you to the ISPOR document. You can also Google it to find it. But basically, depends on the level of evidence you need to have, depends on the level of modification you're making to the instrument. And so there are basically three levels of modification: minor, moderate, and substantial. A minor modification might be something where you're just changing, you're having patients tap a response or select a response rather than circle a response. Maybe you're changing the number of questions, so you have one question per screen rather than 10 questions per page. So these are really non-substantive changes. And the level of evidence required for these types of changes would be really just cognitive debriefing, which is a process that shows participants understand that the new instrument is the same as the original, that the concepts are the same. And usability testing. Usability testing is something you'll always want to do, regardless of the level of change. A moderate type of modification might be a modification where you're changing the wording of a particular item, or maybe a more significant change of presentation. Here you'd also want to do usability testing, but you might want to do equivalence testing. So that equivalence testing would be basically doing a study, a randomized study perhaps, on the paper versus the electronic form to show that they produce equivalent results. And then finally, you might be faced with a substantial level of modification. So, in this case, if you're really substantially changing item response options, really fundamentally rewording questions, you're basically looking at creating a totally new instrument. You may have to go through full psychometric testing. Fortunately, there are some joint efforts out there to try and facilitate the development of electronic instruments to help us move from paper. ISPOR has some great resources and guidelines for helping you do it. There's the Critical Path Institute, which has both a PRO and an ePRO consortium, which is working on a number of efforts to generate measurement equivalence data, and they also publish some really good white papers and best practices. And then there's a large effort at the NIH called PROMIS, and PROMIS has a fairly large, I'm not sure how many instruments are in it at this point, but they have a fairly large repository of freely distributed instruments that have been tested. Most of them are available in multiple languages as well. You can go to nihpromis.org to see what they have available. And as I mentioned, you're always going to want to do usability testing. And when you do usability testing, please make sure you actually use the actual participants, whether they're patients or somebody else, and the clinicians if you're doing Clinro. Make sure you're using the real form. Make sure you're using the electronic form. Don't give them a paper mock-up or something like that. Don't rely on that as the usability testing. Make sure they're actually using the real system. So I'm going to just talk real quickly about some of the most applicable regulatory guidance documents that are out there. I have on the call with me my colleague Laura Keita, who is a regulatory compliance expert. She's worked as an auditor. So during the Q&A sessions, if you guys have particular questions about these, she can answer those. Also, this is a subject that can get into a huge amount of detail. And if folks on the webinar would like to see a separate webinar conducted specifically on this topic, please provide that as feedback to us. And if there's enough demand for doing so, we'd be happy to organize it. So in 2009, the FDA published their patient-reported outcomes guidance. And this wasn't specific to electronic modalities, but it certainly does apply to it. And it talks about how the FDA reviews and evaluates both the existing as well as modified and newly created PRO instruments that are used to support claims and approved medical product labelings. So that would be a key read, especially if you're going to be targeting an FDA submission. There are two particular e-source guidance documents. One is published from the FDA. The other is a reflection paper from the EMA. And both of these documents are designed to assure the reliability, the quality, and the integrity of the data that's collected from electronic source. And I should add as well that both of these agencies seem seem to really want to get behind and promote the increased use of electronic modalities. And from our experience, we've seen the representatives from both the FDA and EMA be very eager to help in the planning stages, to help provide feedback and advice prior to implementation. We found their mindset to be one where they really want to help and be on the same team as the sponsor. There's also more recent guidance published in 2013 from the FDA about mobile medical applications. So the big question here is if you're using a mobile app, is your mobile app a medical device? So your mobile app could be construed as a medical device and regulated as such if it meets certain requirements. For instance, if your app is intended to diagnose or treat disease, if it's dispensing medical advice, if it's telling a person with diabetes to take more insulin because the glucose meter, collected an abnormally low value. Those would all be examples of settings in which the FDA probably would want to regulate your app as a mobile device. This guidance is fairly easy to read. It's full of tons of very specific examples of things the FDA would consider medical devices and things they wouldn't. So I'd recommend reviewing that as well. So now let's wrap up by looking at some of the technology options that are available to support your ECOA strategy. And when it comes to technology, you have a lot of choices. You can use smartphones, you can use tablets, you could use, watches. You can provide devices to patients. You can let them use their own, potentially. Less common, you might see some digital pen solutions out there, or some IVR solutions out there. So I'll take a brief look at each of these. So smartphones are typically the most commonly used type of device in ePRO settings. By comparison, tablets are typically the most commonly used device in Clinro settings. When you think of a smartphone, you have a well-integrated, pre-integrated messaging capabilities. You'll have SMS, you'll have a phone. Oftentimes you'll be able to have email on these devices. So these are all channels with which you can use to communicate with the patient. Keep in mind that the smaller screen size of many smartphones, although some are getting quite large, may present issues for certain types of instruments. If you have a vast scale that has to be 10 centimeters, you'll probably have a problem with most smartphones out there. Also, if you're provisioning smartphones or any type of device, you want to think about the logistics around that provisioning. What are you going to do for backups? What happens if are you going to be providing internet connectivity? What happens if the internet connectivity fails? How quickly will you be able to get backups? Are you going to use paper as a backup? And there are lots of implications with all of those decision points that need to be made. Tablets, since they're bigger, they can more readily emulate paper. And of course, if you're provisioning tablets, there would be less validation burden, perhaps. Digital pens are something that we're not seeing as much these days. You have a special pen, you have special paper. There are kind of more different technology components in the chain, more links in the chain, more things that need to be managed. You still have paper. Legibility may still present an issue with, because you're relying on software to interpret someone's handwriting. And IVR, there are limited types of questions. IVR is, for those of you who don't know, is interactive voice response. So think of a phone system a patient might call into, and the phone system would read them questions and have them, press numbers on their phone keypad to provide their response. So there are limited types of questions you can really administer that type of modality. You need to worry about the recall time as well when it comes to IVR, the time between which the question is read to the patient and the time that it takes for the system to read all of these selection choices to the patient. The patient may have forgotten what the question was by the time the system has read through all of the selection choices. So I'm going to take a little bit of a drive through the consideration of whether to use an app or whether to use the web. And both options have limitations and liberties. So an app is something that has to be downloaded onto a device. It's something that may need to be updated throughout the trial. It's harder to update an app. It can be harder, I should say, to update an app versus the web, although it can be a very seamless experience as well. But you need to make sure you have a plan for how updates to the questionnaires, to the protocol, will be pushed out to the app throughout the trial. If you have an app, most likely you will have data stored on the device. So if you have clinical data stored on the device, you need to make sure it's protected. If you have a web-based system, you may not have data stored on the device, which can relieve you from that additional responsibility. Responsive design is something that is most attributable to the web. I touched on it briefly earlier. It can allow basically the instruments to function well across a whole wide range of different device sizes in a reliable and validated way. And then if you're thinking about the app versus web equation, I'd encourage you to also think about what actually is an app. I mean, an app could be nothing more than a simple limited front end to a system that is really powered via a web server anyway. So you might be able to get the benefits of both worlds. So now let's look at the device provisioning versus the bring your own device equation. Should you provision a device? Should you allow patients to bring their own device? If you provision a device to a patient, it's not their own device. So they may forget it. They may forget to bring it with them when they go to work or when they're, wherever they are. If you can allow patients to use their own devices, they're probably already in the habit of carrying it with them. If you provision a device, you have greater control over the user's experience on the device. But then in a BYOD setting, you're going to have potentially unlimited, an unlimited set of potential device configurations, some of which it will be impossible to know in advance. One thing that you can do in a BYO setting is the system could potentially block certain types of devices that are clearly not suitable for the trial. So you can allow it to be BYOD, but only within a certain range of types of devices. In provisioning situations, you are going to have many more connectivity issues with your users than in BYOD settings, where the users already connected, they already have their device. You may want to remunerate the patients for use of their data plan, but that's something that can typically be easily addressed. So, I would encourage you as well to not necessarily think of it as an either-or decision point. In many cases, you could do both BYOD and provision devices. For instance, you may not want to have the requirement that a patient possess a device as part of the eligibility criteria for your study. You may not want to have that bias your population. So maybe in those types of situations, for those particular patients, you provision a device to them, while other patients could use their own device. So looking forward, more and more trials are being conducted collecting COA data, especially in the post-marketing phase. And BYOD is growing there a lot as well. And as technology advances and through responsive design, BYOD is becoming a much more compelling option. I think we're going to see a shift towards BYOD, in a major way in coming years. Currently, technology in general is further ahead than both the regulations and adoption. And from a regulatory standpoint, the regulators acknowledge that. So I would encourage you to reach out to your friendly FDA representatives to have early and often conversations with them. And you'll probably find them to be very helpful. As time goes on, the scientific evidence is really the body of scientific evidence is really growing to broaden the use of these types of technologies. And my hope is that you found these considerations useful as you undertake ECOA. And I'd really like to encourage you to think of what's possible rather than what's not possible, because every day more and more things are possible.